with some housekeeping. Just to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded live, and a copy will be uploaded to the council's website over the next couple of days. If people are not speaking, please can you mute your microphones, and can you please make sure there's no electrical device close by, because that can cause interference. So please can members make sure that their mobile phones are turned off or muted or on silent. And if people do experience some slow connection, can you while we're advising if people can turn off their cameras, and that should help in some small ways. So on that basis, if I can start with the agenda, and can I ask for nomination for position of chairman? Please bear in mind that nominations can only come from members of non-executive groups. Okay, can I have any nominations, please?
I nominate Councillor Carroll.
Any other nominations? Okay. On that basis, then, can I ask Councillor Carroll to take the chair?
Does that need to be seconded? I'll second myself if necessary.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Gareth. Thank you to members for the electing me chair. There was you had a great choice to choose from there. If we move on to appointment of vice chairman, then do we have any nominations? I'll nominate Councillor Leighton Rowlands.
Yeah, and Councillor Rowlands, you'll have to second that as well.
I second myself.
Okay.
Do we have any
nominations?
Okay, I'll take that as a no. Councillor Rowlands then is elected as vice chairman. If we move to item 3, then apologies for absence. Obviously, we've got Mr. Lewis. I think everyone else is here, if I'm correct, Gareth.
That's correct, Chair. Just Mr. Lewis, yeah.
Okay, and if we move on to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 29th of July, are there any points, clarifications, or other issues members would wish to raise? Okay, well, in that case, I'll propose that the minutes be signed off. If I could have a seconder, please. Councillor Norman, thank you for that. And if we move on to item 5, which is to receive declarations of interest, do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, I will take that as a no. On to item 6 then, the reports. First of all, the Audit Wales audit inquiries to those charged with governance and management.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I'm probably taking this one. As you'll see, the report outlines for you information that we're requested to provide to Audit Wales as part of the audit process for the accounts. You'll see that they're specifically asking for information in relation to fraud, laws and regulations and related parties, and you'll see that Appendix 1, 2 and 3 was our response back to Audit Wales under those 3 headings. You'll note some of the detail in the appendices does talk about a key role that internal audit has in this respect, and also that there are certain reports that we bring through this committee which address some of these issues, such as the complaints report and the whistleblowing report. Also pleasing to note that we are not reporting any instances of fraud in the last financial year, and that we've had no reports from regulatory bodies that we need to bring to the attention of our auditors. So I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. I don't know whether Steve from Audit Wales would want to add anything to that.
Yes, please. Thank you, Carys. This is pretty much standard routine sort of assurance we seek from all our audits. This is something that's not unique to the Vale, and is to inform our audit approach, and per the ISAs obtain assurance on certain aspects of the audit that we need to sort of gain assurance upon. And there's nothing arising in this response from the council that is a cause to concern to us or an adverse impact on our audit. That's probably pretty much I can say in regard to that point, I think, Carys, and for the benefit of members.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. So we're just asking committee to receive this report for information and to note its contents.
Okay, thank you for that, Caris. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay, I'll take that as a no. It's good news to see that there were no instances of fraud during the year as well, so I think that's something to put on the record. But other than that, are we all happy to note the report as set out in the papers? Okay, if we, I'll take that as yes then. Gareth, just to clarify on this point, I'm assuming the same principle as applied in other committees will be sufficient here, so that unless there's any dissent, we can take this as accepted.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks for that, Gareth. If we move on to item 7 then, which is the External Audit Plan 2020.
Right. Sorry, Chair, I just lost my connection into this report. No. Right,
Shall
sorry.
I take this forward, Caris?
I was going to say yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. For some reason, I can't load it at the minute.
Okay, that's not a problem at all. This is our report anyway, but Caris could have introduced it. But at the end of the day, this is, well, rather belatedly, our audit plan for this year. It was actually due to come to a previous audit committee, but other circumstances have sort of halted that, didn't they, in terms of the pandemic? So it is very late, unfortunately, in terms of coming to this audit committee. That doesn't sort of pose any problems in terms of, in terms of the governance aspects in regard to that. Or nor does it pose any issues in regard to our audit. So, but given it still needs to come to this committee, so I'll just briefly run you through the content, although it will be fairly familiar to you, so it's very similar structure and format as it has done in previous years. It picks up, as I say, what we plan to do in terms of the financial audit and also the performance audit. As you well know, I come from a financial audit perspective, so I can pick up on some of the performance audit points. But if there's any questions or queries in regard to the performance audit areas, I'll have to take them forward, unfortunately, and get back to you. But I'll do my best to answer them. We did have the opportunity to update this audit plan in regard to COVID-19, and hence the issue of this report in May. Because that obviously was going to have a huge impact on our audits, which evidently it did, to a greater or lesser extent than what we expected. And there's some commentary there included in the audit plan in terms of the anticipated impacts. And this largely talks about the impact being the fact we'd have to be flexible and we'd have to work with audited bodies in terms of undertaking our audit work, and also being sensitive to the needs of audited bodies, because obviously the circumstances was making life very difficult for all concerned, really. So there's a bit of commentary there in regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. The next section moves on to the audit of the financial statements. And here it talks about our requirements to undertake the audit, and there's some commentary there in regard to that, which again is similar to what you would have seen in previous years. And then the report then refers to some particular financial audit risks that we'll need to undertake in undertaking our audit. The first one is badged up as a significant risk, but this is again a significant risk for every financial audit we undertake. Per the ISAs, is something we can't rebut. It is a significant risk, as I say, for every financial audit, and that's the risk of management override, and that's the risk of management potentially manipulating the accounts. Now, as I say, this isn't a reflection of what we perceive as a risk at the Vale of Glamorgan, not by any means. It is just a standard audit procedure, audit risk rather, we need to consider when we devise our audit procedures and undertaking our audit work. Then there's some other areas for audit attention, which are more specific, if you like, to the Vale of Glamorgan. The first one relates to the school and pension fund arrangements, and that's largely because there's a number of schools within the council that don't use the council to administer their payroll. So we have had to sort of consider certain audit procedures to obtain assurance on those payrolls, or each of those payrolls rather, because they are all material to our financial audit opinion rather. The second point relates to McLeod, which is something you're probably well versed on now, because this has come up over the last few years in regard to our audit work. And this was just keeping a track of developments in terms of McLeod, in terms of the impact that's going to have on our audit. We'll come on to that shortly, actually. And then obviously there's some commentary then on COVID, which I've already talked about, and some additional commentary in terms of ensuring that we liaise with other local authority auditors to ensure that the financial transactions in regard to the Cardiff City deal are captured. And so finally, there's some information there on leases, but that work has been postponed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we come on to the section in regard to performance audit. Like I said, I'm probably not ideally placed to comment on this, but if there are any, this particular section, but if there are any questions concerning this, I'm obviously very happy to take them back to the performance audit team. The next section then refers to the grant claims work, which we will be undertaking for this year. And in fact, we are about to commence that work. The key thing to perhaps bear in mind here in regard to the grant certification work is that the shape and extent of that work for this financial year is going to be far less than what we've been required to undertake in other years. In so much as the housing benefits claim is still required, the teacher's pension claim is still required to be require audit certification, as is your NNDR return. Or the more routine Welsh Government grant certification work is no longer required. That said, the housing benefit claim takes up the lion's share of our sort of audit time in regard to grant certification work. Probably makes up like 90% or so of the audit time. So it's not going to have a huge impact, if you like, in terms of the audit fee, or the expected audit fee, I should say. In terms of the audit team then, section, I'm just pleased to say really, ultimately, that there's been no significant changes. The only change to note is Rachel, as you know, has joined the audit team, and who you've already met. It feels slightly odd in some respects talking about this audit plan at such a belated stage, because you've obviously met Rachel, but that's just as obviously flagged that key change to the team. In terms of the audit fee then, as you can see, from Exhibit 3, the fees have actually kind of proposed to reduce from the fees in the prior year. That's largely due, as I said, to the expected reduction in the grant certification work. That's pretty much it in terms of a very rapid run through the audit plan. Before we go on to the next segment, there's an addendum issued to the audit plan. I'd be very happy to take any questions you might have on the plan, or if indeed there's anything you wish me to take back to my performance audit colleagues.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. I see Councillor Johnson has indicated he would wish to speak, so I'll go to Councillor Johnson first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve, for the report. Obviously, these are unprecedented times, and I think everything that we deal with tonight is going to have to take into consideration impact of COVID. It's almost this stage of the pandemic is almost taken as read that things aren't acting normally. There's two areas I just wanted to just clarify, not necessarily for Steve perhaps, but more maybe as much for Caris, around the number of schools which are not part of our payroll and pension, and whether there was any moves, why that is, and whether any moves to align those, because clearly that's an additional level of work for something which is largely the same for everybody except for these. So I'm interested to know why those exceptions still exist, as it were, if there's any moves to bring them in. And the other is just the IFRS 16 leases, which I think Steve said are not being conducted this year, but I just think that's worth just unpacking what that refers to, because although I have heard of that before, I think we've discussed it before, it doesn't instantly spring to mind. Thanks.
I'm quite happy to take that question with regard to the school payrolls. I think you touched on it. Some of these are historic and have not been with the council now for a number of years. With regards to, is any work being done to bring them back on in with the council? I think it's safe to say that our HR colleagues do speak to them on a fairly regular basis to see whether or not they would be interested in using our payroll services, but both schools have decided that they don't want to, and that's their decision. But I know HR do keep in contact with them to try and encourage them back, but at the end of the day they've made arrangements with other providers and they wish to stick with those at the current time. In relation to the leases issue, Gemma, would you be able to help out with that one, please? You're on mute, Gemma.
You put your microphone on, please. Okay, Gareth, I think that must be a an issue with the system.
I think no, she's unmuted on my system, so unless there's an issue with Gemma's microphone, I'm not sure. Gemma, can you wave? Gemma, can you
in that case, could we get somebody from IT to make contact with Gemma to try and sort this out, please, and perhaps refer to Caris in the meantime? Okay.
Are you happy for me to provide? I can provide a bit of commentary on this. It's after all, it is an hour. In the meantime, Gemma might sort out her IT glitches there. Basically, in the past, well, for as long as I can remember, really, there's always been a distinction between leases in terms of how they're accounted for. The distinction was, is something an operating lease and therefore not on the balance sheet? Or is it a finance lease and therefore it is on the balance sheet? Now, IFRS 16 is changing all of that. It's a bit of a game changer, really, in terms of how leases are accounted for. It basically means that all leases, if it's subject to certain requirements, such as being over a certain value, should all be recognised on the balance sheet with a corresponding liability. So both the asset in value of the lease, plus the corresponding liabilities are recognised on the council's balance sheet. That's the key change. And the big implication of that upon the council is the fact that a large exercise really needs to be undertaken, which I think has commenced. You know, we've had discussions with this with the Vale officers, but the exercise needs to be undertaken to identify all the leases in the council to determine, first of all, is it above the threshold, and secondly, you know, well, first of all, the first thing that I guess to check is, does it exist? What leases exist? And then is it above the threshold? And then thirdly, the accounting treatment. It is a large exercise. I don't think it should be underestimated because it's when you consider the schools and the complexities of the council. But and there are also embedded leases that might need consideration. And by that, I mean something like, for instance, potentially a school transport contract could have an embedded lease that might require recognition under IFRS 16. It's quite a complicated technical area, but that's like a quick sort of overview of the requirements.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. I understand that Councillor Wilson wishes to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. The points I really like to raise are in relation to on page 8 of 12 on the performance audit programme. I know, Steve, you say you're not an expert, but I wonder if you could still help me out if possible. Mostly, I'm really looking at the idea of prevention and the well-being of future generations. I'm just wondering what that really is about. And that's one question. And the other question I turn to is on page 9 of 12 on financial sustainability. Now, it would be interesting to see what sort of analysis you're going to be doing on that, given the fact we've obviously got COVID and the financial situation regarding that. And I'm just wondering what's your remit on that, what's your objective behind it, and also what you're going to be looking at as well. I mean, are you going to be doing some sort of ratio analysis at all? Are you going to be looking at our reserves? And if so, what kind of reserves are you going to be looking at? And also, are you going to be looking at our income sources and the impact upon that, along with our expenditure sources? And also, to what extent is external bodies like the Welsh Government, for example, helping us out along with other income providers as well? So I'd be interested to see some sort of, sort of presentation on that, perhaps at a latter audit meeting.
Yeah, I'll pick up the financial sustainability point first, because the output of our first review, as you very well know, is on the agenda later. But you're quite right in pointing out the landscape has changed hugely since the issue of that report. And whilst we always plan to follow up that financial sustainability work with some follow-up work, it's what we intended to do is now subject to huge change. The scope of that work is subject to huge amendment. I can see Anthony's joining us now, by the way. Anthony might be able to add further commentary on this in a moment and add a bit more colour and context. But yes, the scope of it is still to be determined. I haven't seen it yet, to be honest, but you can guarantee it's going to take on a much different form to what was planned 6, 7, 8 months ago. But once we get further information upon the scope of that actual work, we can bring that to this committee potentially, if that's something you're interested in. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I would be very interested in that. And obviously, in the other point I was making reference to, just for the benefit of Anthony, who's just joined us, is about the theme of prevention under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I'm just wondering what that really means and how that may have an impact upon our committee.
Personally, I don't think I'm in a good position, unfortunately, to answer that question. I'm not sure if Anthony is. I'm not sure if Anthony is able to even hear the commentary at this stage. But what I will do is take that away and...
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can hear you, Anthony.
Yes, I can.
First and foremost, apologies for my being late to the meeting. I did have a little trouble with the IT. Can I just recap, everyone? Are we on the financial resilience report?
We're on the external audit
Anthony,
plan.
We're on the external audit plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I just recap for Anthony's sake, we're on the audit plan. Councillor Wilson has raised 2 questions. One relates to the wellbeing of future generations work, and particularly what does that mean in terms of prevention, which is what's referred to in the plan. I've said, unfortunately, I'm unable to answer that, but I will take that away and do my best to answer that with performance audit colleagues. And the second question was in regard to the scope of the financial sustainability work. And I provided some commentary about the fact that what we intended to do is going to be changed drastically as a result of COVID-19. But the scope of that work is yet to be determined. But you might have some further information on that, Anthony, which I haven't got sight of.
Councillor Wilson, in terms of your last question regarding the financial resilience report, we've got a report on the agenda later today. And when I present that report, I'll give an update in terms of the next stage, in terms of what we're doing currently in terms of the financial resilience stuff, because there is a report due out from us on an all Wales basis in early October, which brings the position right up to date in terms of the COVID implications of finances in terms of local authorities across Wales. To revert back to your initial question regarding prevention, it's a good one. It fundamentally underpins the WFG objectives. In terms of the work that we'll do, and that's something that we yet to conclude with the council in terms of which area we'll be looking at. That's all we know at the minute, is that it will be a theme. The theme would be prevention, and that's something that we just got to have a further discussion on with officers of the council.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, if we move on to the recommendation then to consider the external audit plan, well, I think that's been considered. So if I take that we're all satisfied and move on to item 8, which is the audit of the 1920 financial statements.
Shall I just start this one off, and then I'm sure colleagues in Audit Wales will want to come in and talk you through their findings, really. Members will remember that in July you saw the draft accounts for the last financial year, in other words 2019-20, and at that point they were just being handed over to Audit Wales to commence their audit. Well, we're now at the position where the audit is at the final stages of completion. So what you have in front of you is the final accounts as they stand at the moment. The plan is that, as you know, our process is that Audit Committee see the final accounts, and we hope you agree them, and then they are due to go to full council. A special meeting is taking place in about 10 days' time for them to be signed off. For the first time that I can remember, we've got an issue around items of correspondence, which is referred to in the report, and I'm sure either Anthony or Steve will talk you through what that actually means with regards to what that process is, and also what it means for us closing the accounts. So I will hand over them to them in a minute. One comment I would like to make is that we mentioned it before tonight, you can't get away from COVID and the impact that it's having. I think need to say a big thank you to both staff within the accountancy team for delivering these accounts only 2 weeks later than we'd originally planned, and also to our colleagues in Audit Wales, because they've undertaken the audit as well, and it's only we're only coming to you 2 weeks later than we planned. So been tremendous teamwork really across the two organisations, I think, to get us to this stage. So if my colleagues in Audit Wales are all right, can I pass the baton over to one of yourselves?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you, Caris, and thank you for your comments. Yes, well, we've completed the audit in quite challenging circumstances in some respects. But anyway, I'm pleased to report that we intend to issue an unqualified, clean audit opinion. However, as Caris quite rightly pointed out, we're currently unable to close the audit and issue an audit certificate due to some matters raised in regard to correspondence from local electors. I'll comment on that further, and so will Anthony as well, in a few moments. But before I do, I'll just take you through the main body of the report, just to help inform your decision, which is fundamentally why this report is in front of you today, as to whether you're content to recommend approval of the accounts by the full council on the 5th of October. So I just take you now through the main body of the report. Paragraph 6 of the report refers to the fact that we have substantially completed the audit, subject to the completion of some areas that were, at the time of drafting the report, incomplete. Now, I'm glad to say that all areas within those 4 or 5 bullet points there are now complete, apart from our internal quality review arrangements. And that's just very much a timing issue, and a large part of that is in fact complete, but it's not entirely complete. So it's just to sort of bring you totally up to speed really, and totally up to date with the progress of the audit. The next section of the report, again, refers to COVID-19. It's a bit of a recurring theme this evening, isn't it? But it wouldn't surprise you to learn that this has had quite a large impact on the audit, as it has on all our financial audits this year. The key impacts on this particular audit have been the changes in the accounts production dates and also the audit deadlines. Everything has sort of slipped a little bit, really, but not too much so, as Caris quite rightly pointed out. And also the fact that the audit, which is in many ways quite an amazing feat in some respects, both the accounts production and the audit process has been undertaken remotely. We've all been working off-site, at our various homes, undertaking the audit process, which is no mean feat really for both sides concerned. But despite these challenges, I think it's fair to say the audit's gone smoothly. We've had good quality draft accounts from the council. The Council have provided us with good working papers and audit evidence on a timely basis, and we've also had excellent engagement from the Council to support the audit process. So I'd like to just formally, thank the Council and Caris and her team for the support granted and given to us to undertake the audit process. The next section of the report goes on to refer to the audit opinion. And the report here, we reiterate our intention here to issue an unqualified opinion, which is obviously a good outcome for the Council. However, there are two matters here that I do need to bring to your attention. The first of which, again, relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that's had on a number of valuations. Valuers in regard to the pension fund and your own valuers in regard to your land and building assets have expressed material valuation uncertainty in regard to those particular property assets within the ones you own and also the ones within the pension fund. So as a result, there's been disclosures included within the accounts for this and also related adjustments to our audit certificate to refer to the fact. And there's two paragraphs which I'll come to very shortly, called emphasis of matter paragraphs, which just sort of bring the readers, I guess, attention to this particular valuation uncertainty. Our opinion remains unqualified. It is an emphasis. It's just an emphasis of this particular matter, which a reader of the account should be aware of. Just to reassure you as well, these issues are affecting virtually every local government body, if indeed not every body within Wales at the moment in terms of the public sector. It is a very widespread issue as a result of COVID-19. It's impacted on most of my audits, in fact. The second point I need to refer you to in regard to our audit opinion is the fact that we're currently unable to formally close the audit. This is due to some issues raised by local electors. And whilst we are satisfied that these issues don't have a material impact on the accounts, we do need to undertake further audit work to review these matters. And so we cannot yet, unfortunately, for the Council, certify the completion of the audit. I'll stop there for a moment. I'm not sure if Anthony will wish to add anything to that particular point.
I will come in there if I may, Chair. Just to reiterate, because it's quite it's not a unique issue, but it's quite unusual being in this position. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And indeed, this issue has happened in the Vale back, for those who remember, 5 years ago when we took the audit over in 2015-16. Just to reiterate, we do intend to provide an opinion, an unqualified, clean opinion, but we can't close the audit off. The reason being is that we've had two members of the public giving us notice of their intention to object to the accounts, to an item of expenditure within the accounts. How can they do that? They're permitted to do that because it's enshrined in legislation. Basically, under the Public Audit Wales Act, members of the public can inspect the accounts, they can question us as the auditor, and of course they can object to an item of account, and that's where we are today. They can only object on two grounds. One is that an item of account is unlawful, or that an item of account raises some significant value for money issues that they feel that we as the auditors should raise a public interest report on. So ultimately, we can still give an opinion as of today because we believe the account, those matters are not material in terms of the amounts involved. However, just in terms of the next stages, Chair, we will look to clarify the objections with the members of the public. We'll then undertake a review of those matters with a view to concluding. But ultimately, on conclusion, the accounts, all things being equal, will need to be reapproved by Council. And of course, at that point, we'll need to reissue our audit report. So there is some further work to do here, which will need to be done. We'll need to do it properly. We'll need to be doing it carefully. But we just thought we'd bring that to your attention as part of our accounts update for you.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, Chair, shall I stop now for a moment to take the question from Councillor Johnson?
At this point, please, would that be okay, Steve? I'll start with
course.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Steve and Anthony, for that. Are you in a position to explain what those objections are to the committee? And there's a secondary question, which is, of course, that there is a full council on 5th of October in order to accept these. The report here. Obviously, it's great to have an unqualified report, and congratulations, thank you to everybody for that. But from our governance perspective, it seems a little bit weird to have a meeting at which we will sit around and probably praise everybody for the hard work they've done in getting this in order, considering the circumstances in which it's done, whilst at the same time not be able to actually pass that subject to the work that's still being carried out and what's in the recommendation here, which I think is what Karis is going to say, which is about the giving us delegated responsibility. It just seems strange to be having a meeting which isn't actually maybe able to make the final decision, and then us having to have a meeting in order to make that final decision. So I'm just clarifying that in my head from our governance perspective, why we're rushing into a meeting when actually it hasn't been closed down. So there's two questions in there, one I think for Anthony and one perhaps for Karis or the administration. Thank you.
Chair, if I could pick up certainly the first question from Councillor Johnson. We're in the process, Councillor, of carefully clarifying the nature of the two objections with both members of the public. It's really important that we do that so we don't go down the wrong path and invest money into any sort of review whereby we're not clear right from the outset exactly what we're looking at and the scope of that review. Saying that, I think what I can tell you is that the first objection is in relation to a highways works matter. The second objection is probably a number of issues, but primarily matters in relation to highways and travel schemes. So I hope you appreciate, I can't go into too much detail because I don't want to put us in a difficult position with the two members of the public as we are still clarifying, but I hope that gives you a feel for the direction of travel in which these queries are based on. We have done a review in so much as we are able to quantify to a certain extent that the potential values involved in these transactions. Hence, we will be able to give an opinion as of just after the 5th of October.
If I could just come in there, Anthony, I'd be happy to raise this again under part 2 if you could perhaps provide some more information then that wouldn't, for various reasons, couldn't be in the public domain. I do think it's important that this committee is kept fully up to date on these issues, regardless of whether you think it's going to not be a problem in the long run. So would that be an option?
It's not so much a matter of not being a problem, I think, in the long run. Worst case scenario, we know that the amount won't impact on the financial statements from a materiality perspective. But I think, I'll be brutally honest with the committee. I mean, ultimately, when we review these matters, we're faced with two questions following the conclusion of our work. One is, do we issue a public interest report? Or two, if we think an item of account is unlawful, do we declare that matter to the court to try and put the matter right? Now, they're quite extreme circumstances, but these are the options that are available to us. If we don't go down those routes, we are permitted in law to explain our rationale for doing whatever course of action we're doing to those members of the public. So it's important that we go through this process carefully, stay within the parameters of the legislation that is set out. But I do appreciate, and go back to Councillor Johnson's question, it's not ideal position in terms of yourselves signing off as of today. And I would suggest, and again, this is a matter for you as the committee, you would potentially sign off, providing you were comfortable enough to do so, but it would be subject to the eventual satisfactory closure of the audit. If we close the audit today, then basically nobody can challenge any item of the account. That's why we have to leave the accounts themselves open, for want of a word, to enable these members of the public to take the right advantage of the legislation as it stands.
Just to come back on that though, Anthony, the only point I would make is as a committee, it's our job to scrutinise these matters ourselves. Now, I therefore do think it would be appropriate in private, perhaps under part 2, if that's more appropriate, for us to at least be informed of the details of these to consider.
Again, Chair, I'm more than happy to go into a private session, and I'll do my best to furnish you with as much information as I possibly can. But I would caveat that in that we are trying our best to clarify precisely what the objections cover, and what I wouldn't want to do is to take the committee down a path it doesn't need to be taken down. So I would, and again, these came in fairly late in the process. Ideally, we'd have clarified them and cleared them at this point in time, but we've been unable to do so.
Okay, well, on that basis, from a personal point of view, I don't know what other members would have to say on that. I would be content to be kept updated and in the loop on this. I think Councillor Wilson wishes to speak.
Yeah, can I just come in about your point, Chair, about a part 2? Now, obviously, having known about part 2s before, you can't suddenly go into part 2 during a meeting without it being pre-advertised, as far as I know. In my experience, you cannot do that. You've got to tell the public, and of course there's no part 2 on this agenda, so this is not the place to do it today. Not unless you have pre-decided, Chair, that you want to do it, but my understanding is you need prior notification to do that. You can't suddenly decide to do it during the course of an event. But obviously we've got Democratic who can give us an expertise on that point, because obviously that's something that we do need to think about. Secondly, of course, my point, I know it hasn't yet been answered. I know what Councillor Johnson was saying about the point of the special meeting. Now, obviously, the special meeting is, as far as I can see, is to approve the accounts. But obviously, we can only approve the accounts subject to that caveat. And I think the caveat is obviously dependent upon the investigation. That will probably be an initial investigation that will be carried out by Audit Wales. Now, obviously, Audit Wales will need to be satisfied that there is a case to answer by these two letters of opinion about the accounts. I mean, and obviously, they need to find out what the remit is and does it affect the accounts? We don't know. But Councillor Cowell is right in the sense that we need to be kept abreast of it, because it may involve other areas of audit that maybe need to be looked at. But again, it may have no material consideration upon the closure of the accounts.
Could I come back in?
Yes.
Just to come back to you, Councillor Wilson, the initial work that we've undertaken has confirmed that the matters would not be material to the accounts. Therefore, you could provide confirmation to council that they could sign off the accounts as they stand, that the opinion within the accounts, it would just mean at this moment in time the accounts would remain open. So I think my advice to you as a committee would be to just be clear what you're saying to full council in terms of the conclusions of this discussion.
Does Carys want to come in on this point?
I think it may well have been addressed, but it was just to confirm the governance issue really that Councillor Johnson has raised, which is why there is that second recommendation in tonight's report. And what we were hoping you would do is, as Anthony has said, he doesn't believe at the current time that the outcome of this is material to the accounts and that it will have any impact on the accounts as they stand. Therefore, the proposal was that we continue, if you're happy to approve the accounts once Steve's gone through the details with you, and we continue to go to the special meeting on the 5th of October and ask them to give a delegation back to Audit Committee to approve the accounts once that work is finished, with a rider on there that should the work that Anthony and his team do actually they dig out more information and that opinion changes then, and it changes the accounts, we would then have to take them back to full council.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Cerys. For me, it just feels a little bit clumsy and unclear. Maybe a little bit old-fashioned, and obviously this is a very difficult year for everything, but we can't on the one hand say how well everything has gone with the process if we are then going to full council with with riders and with not quite readies and things like that. It feels a little bit cart before horse to be holding a special full council to sign off our accounts when our accounts aren't signed off. I apologize if there's any incorrect terminology within there. I'm not the financial CITFA expert, etc. But I like to go to if I'm being asked as a committee member to approve something which is going to a full council to approve something, then I'd like it finished rather than going there with, by the way, we haven't quite finished this yet. Can you give us some delegated powers, and if we're still not happy with it, can we bring it back to you? That just feels it feels less straightforward than it should be. So really, I'm clarifying the purpose of a meeting which isn't going to resolve the issues. A special meeting to resolve something that isn't resolving it. So that just feels a little bit strange to me. In terms of how I would anticipate the flow. I would expect for this committee to sign something off or to agree what's being brought forward, and then we go to full council. Unless there is a particular timescale reason for us needing to have that special full council on the 5th of October, I personally would prefer to see these issues resolved successfully, and then we have the full council meeting, so that we don't have a shilly-shallying back and forths, etc. That's a personal opinion. I don't know how others might feel about
that. Carys, did you want to come back in on that?
I suppose as far as the reporting deadlines are concerned for this year, they don't have to be signed off now. They have been extended because of COVID. I think that our view is that the accounts are complete now, apart from just resolving these two issues, neither of which financially are material. And currently, we do not think they're going to impact on the accounts, that they will not change. I would like to get the accounts agreed if we can. The longer they remain open, the more difficult they are for us to deal with. But I do understand the point that you are making, and that it feels a bit clumsy. It was put forward really as a solution to an abnormal issue that we've not really dealt with in this way before. I don't know whether Anthony's got a view on from an Audit Wales perspective, they've lined up dates for signing off the accounts. Whether or not it impacts on those proposals, I don't know whether he'd want to comment on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. And again, notwithstanding your own views, Councillor Johnson, our expectation, if that's the right word to use, would be that following this audit committee, the accounts would find their way to full council, and they'd be asked to approve the accounts because the opinion has been given by ourselves as the external auditor that the accounts are true and fair, but we're unable to close the audit due to these two items of correspondence that are currently being reviewed. They are not material to the opinion, otherwise we would not be given an opinion on your accounts at this point in time. That's traditionally what happens elsewhere when matters such as this arise, and it's also what happened back in 2014-15 when your previous auditors finalised those accounts back at that point. And if those who have been on the committee long enough will remember that we actually signed off 2 sets of accounts in one fell swoop with council as a result of that. That's not in any way to say what you're suggesting isn't appropriate, Councillor Johnson. This legislation is years old. It is clunky. It is a bit clumsy. I acknowledge that. But ultimately, my personal perspective in terms of what I've seen elsewhere would be to follow Caris's perspective, take it to council. Yes, they would need to be reapproved, but we could do that as soon as practically possible.
I think there are a couple of members wishing to come in. Councillor Wilson and then Vice Chairman.
Mute myself. Okay, I think we've had a good debate about this, and I think I'm fairly satisfied that what seems at the evidence that we've seen so far, as the auditors are given their considered opinion that what possibly could be on the table doesn't really affect the materiality of the accounts. Bearing in mind that I don't see a problem of it going to special council, really, for it to be closed off. As Caris rightly said, we like to close it off. You have said, well, the audit office has also said that as well. It would cause you more issues if it remains open. I am very happy with that at the moment. Obviously, if things change, they change. Obviously, you mentioned about timescale. Obviously, the timescale will be as long as a piece of chalk. If we don't find much, it's not really relevant. We could close it down pretty quickly. If it's something bigger, then obviously it will take more time and more investigations. And that's what, as rightly has been said to the chairman, is that we will be kept informed of that matter. I'm happy with that. And really, to be honest, if we need to call a special audit meeting, then we do so. That could be a way of dealing with it. And as Caris rightly said, we can then delegate the final closure to Audit Committee to finally consider it. After all, we're going to have a good time, and we could take our time to consider the detail of the accounts at that special meeting, which is an ideal opportunity to express our views, and we can take as long as we like or as little as we like, because that's the only item on the agenda.
I'm not sure if Caris wants to come in on that, or whether it would be best to go to Councillor Owens first. Unless you want to come in, Caris, I will go straight to Councillor Owens.
Shall I speak, Chair? Yeah. So I probably would disagree with Councillor Wilson. I also feel very uncomfortable in signing for these go off to special meeting. You don't have a contract and have certain bins open up, remaining, and say, oh yeah, we'll sign it, but then we'll come back to it. So I would agree with Councillor Johnson's view on this, and I don't think that we should be signing something off or for it to go to full council. So I would move for a vote, Chair.
I would say, Vice Chair, that if there were a time pressure that meant it had to be dealt in this way, then I would perhaps be more understanding. I do struggle personally to comprehend when the question was put, are there time pressures on this, or would we be able to do things? When I say properly, I'm not suggesting that anything improper is being done, but in the standard way. I do feel as though it's not entirely necessary to go down this route when perhaps there is scope for it to go to full council once this issue has been resolved. So given that there being no further questions or comments on this, I think we should put it to a vote. The one recommendation then was that the report be approved. Are members content with that? I personally would not be at this stage.
Chair, should we do a call and members can indicate their preference? Yeah.
Councillor Wilson wanted to come in on that point.
I just want to come in on a matter of procedure, Chair. Are you going to vote on each recommendation for and against? And have you got anything you're moving as an amendment, Chair?
Well, I would be happy to move an amendment to I'd obviously have to word that.
I'm just going to put the light on now.
To be honest, I'm not sure how I would make an amendment without negating the motion, to be honest with you. Councillor Johnson.
I think before we actually move to the recommendations, I think it's important that officers and Audit Wales are understanding the process concerns that we're having that are being voiced by 3 members of the committee here, which is that to be feeling uneasy with the process whereby we agree this tonight, we take it to full council where we agree it, and where the usual discussion is that we say this has come with the support of the Audit Committee, when it hasn't been finished. So it feels that there's a level of the process that doesn't sit right with me. Anthony and Steve will both be aware, and Karis as well be aware, that I've raised queries about what materiality means and how that's different from an audit perspective than from an elector perspective. Now, this is presumably going to a special committee, special full council. We don't have the power, as we're not calling. I don't know who actually calls a special full council. Perhaps that's a matter for democratic, but I find it difficult for me to go to full council and recommend supporting something where the process hasn't actually been completed in my eyes. So what I feel is that not being quite sure who really has responsibility for calling that. It might be Councillor Norman as the mayor, who's also a member of this committee. But I'm putting forward my concerns that I'm not happy at going to a full council to have a document which has been said to have been agreed by the Audit Committee when I'm not happy that the process has been finalised and completed. So I am making a point here as a member of this committee that I am not 100% satisfied, and I would have to go to council and say I am not 100% satisfied, and I'm uncomfortable that something is to be presented as requiring extra work when it hasn't been done. Now, where that leaves these recommendations is awkward, because I don't want to agree something that hasn't been completed in my eyes. I appreciate the comments regarding this is not material in the eyes of Audit Wales. However, there are objections. They have not yet been dealt with. As a member of the Audit Committee, I want those objections dealt with before I agree something. That's, that I feel is actually quite close to the heart of what this committee should be doing. Members of the public, electors, have raised queries. They have not yet been completed. Therefore, I feel uncomfortable with supporting completion of that now and taking it to council and supporting completion of it there. Now, we're not in charge here of determining the special meeting being called on the 5th of October, or what goes on that agenda. So I don't know where this goes in terms of if several members of the committee here are unhappy, it may still go to that meeting. How is this going to operate? I don't think it's a good look to have a special meeting of full council to agree a document where members of the Audit Committee are sat here saying we feel a little uncomfortable and uneasy at doing that. So what I'm saying is that I feel uncomfortable with this as a process, especially if there's not an urgent timescale which expedites that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
Hello there.
Hello, Councillor Wilson.
Hello there.
Hello, Councillor
Yes,
Wilson.
I have problems with the sound there. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Good.
hear you.
Yes, I was going to make the point that let's sort that out after the votes. Okay, we know where we are then, won't we, in relation to 1 and 2 in terms of recommendation or what follows. Otherwise, we could be ages discussing what could happen. Let's look at the votes first and see what happens.
I would suggest to take a vote on 1 or 2, and then if anybody wishes to move an amendment, a further not an amendment, a further recommendation, then we do that. Right, recommendation 1 then. I'm assuming this will have to be taken by roll call. Gareth.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll do it alphabetically, Chair. Okay. Recommendation 1. Can I have for or against? Councillor Carroll.
Against.
Councillor Drake. For or against? I can't hear you, Councillor Drake, sorry.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor MacArthur.
For.
Councillor Norman.
For.
Councillor Rowlands.
Against.
And Councillor Wilson.
For.
Okay, that's 4 for and 3 against. So recommendation 1 is passed. Do you move to recommendation 2?
Yes. Could we do the same again, please?
Yep. Councillor Carroll, for or against?
Against.
Councillor Drake.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Okay, Councillor MacArthur.
For.
Councillor Norman.
For.
Councillor Rowlands. Hello, Councillor Rowlands.
Sorry. Against.
Okay, and Councillor Wilson.
For.
Okay, that's 5 for and 2 against. So that recommendation is passed.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to put it on record that I think it's a fairly poor reflection that we have a vote on audit recommendations which have gone along the lines of executive versus non-executive. I don't think this shows the council's audit process in a particularly good light.
Can I make a point there, Chair?
Agreed.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to emphasise that my point was based upon the advice to the Welsh Audit Office. And as far as I'm concerned, I am more than satisfied that we are doing the right thing tonight. And it's nothing to do with which side we're on. I'm sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Right, I think that all members' comments have been noted on that. If we move on then to item 9, which is the financial sustainability assessment.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just conscious there were still some matters in the report that we needed to go through with the committee. We took a little bit of a sidebar on the objection issue. So I kindly ask if Steve could return and just cover off the final issues.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Anthony beat me to it. I was about unmuting myself to raise the very same point. It's not a great deal else to go through, but within the report, I stopped and to hesitate to have that commentary and that discussion about the correspondence matters. So in terms of the report, and going back to that, the report talks about any other significant issues arising from the audit. I'm not sure if we're all on track in terms of where we are in terms of the report, but it starts on page, I'm sorry, just bear with me briefly. It's paragraph 19 onwards of the report. So just to bring things back up to speed then, we have an opportunity here to talk about any other significant issues arising. And I'm glad to say there aren't any uncorrected misstatements in the accounts. All adjustments have been corrected within the financial statements. And there's been no qualitative issues arising from the audit that I need to bring to your attention. Indeed, it's quite the opposite. As referred to earlier, there's been very good engagement, good quality working papers and good quality accounts. There are, however, a number of audit adjustments. I'll comment on those very briefly in a moment. And there's also been one recommendation raised in regard to your register of interest arrangements, which again, I'll comment on very briefly in a moment. The rest of the report, just to go through that very quickly, Appendix 1 is the letter of representation, and this concerns certain assurances we will expect from the Council to support the signed accounts. Appendix 2 is our audit report, and here I'll just linger ever so lightly on the emphasis of matter paragraphs, which again, as I said, refer to two particular matters, one being the material valuation uncertainty in regard to the land and building assets, and secondly, in regard to the council share of the pension fund assets within the Cardiff and Vale Pension Fund. The other amendment, so to speak, in regard to the audit report is the revised paragraph regarding the certificate of audit completion, which refers to the fact we're unable to issue the certificate at this point in time, which we've just been referring to. Appendix 3 of the report then talks about a number of adjustments made to the accounts. I don't want to go through these in any great detail. None of them are material, but there's three I'll comment on very briefly. One is in the sense that there's an error in regard to how, in terms of the accounts production, in terms of the compilation of the accounts, the figure of 1.4 million would probably appears quite frightening in many respects, but both expenditure and income are both equally overstated by this error. So there's a neutral impact on the accounts. There's been no impact on the bottom line. So I just want to give you that reassurance. There's also another fairly sizable adjustment of £826,000. But again, that is a presentational issue in terms of the classification between long-term and short-term debtors. So yet again, no impact on the bottom line. And as you can also see, there's a number of adjustments in regard to IS 19 and the pension fund accounting issues, which again have no impact on the bottom line. Finally, just moving on to Appendix 4, this refers to our audit findings in regard to the work we've undertaken in regard to related party transactions. And there's a recommendation we've identified here in terms of how you can improve your declarations of interest arrangements and how they support that disclosure note within the accounts. And I think the key point here is we are satisfied that the Council's constitution is appropriate in this area. It is just that the declaration of interest arrangements can be improved so that members are explicitly required to provide details of any close family members who have interests and disclose them within the return. As I say, we're happy that the Constitution requires this, so there's no fundamental change. It's just a means of beefing up the arrangements, I guess, tightening up the arrangements to ensure full compliance with the code. That's all I wish to say on the report. But happy to take any additional questions there might be.
Okay, are there any additional questions or comments? Okay, well, we've obviously approved the recommendations already. If we move on then to item 9, the financial sustainability assessment.
I'll take this, Chair, if I may, and I'll be very brief and hopefully to the point on this, Chair. A little bit of context for the committee. This work was undertaken at the back end of 2019. I think we agreed the final report with the council probably February of this year, and we would have then brought the report as it stood pre-COVID to this committee for consideration. I'm just conscious that there's a lot of water that's gone under the bridge since we completed this work in terms of the financial landscape within local authorities as a whole. And as I mentioned to Councillor Wilson earlier, that we're now in the process of issuing a second All Wales report, which is due to be published imminently. That said, we did feel for completeness, this report should be shared with you as the Audit Committee to at least understand our findings that were made at that point in time. And I'll make no bones about it, the report was very positive. It concluded that the council was in a strong financial position, and it made some commentary around how it's built up its level of reserves to enable it to cope with a level of financial resilience, and also in terms of the way it handled its stance on borrowing as well. So there was a lot of positive comments in the report. We did note the fact that there were some elements of the council's arrangements that could be improved, but I think overall the report was a very positive one.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anthony, for that brief introduction there. I think that, sort of as we did say before you joined the meeting, COVID means that everything has to be taken with a certain sense of its historical place. What I found interesting about this as a historical document was that it does reflect a lot of the comments and discussions that have taken place in the Audit Committee, in full council, and in corporate performance and resources over the last few years. In terms of the discussion that we've had about our high usable reserves, about the levels of borrowing or not, about the levels of planned savings that have been achieved. There's also interesting political undercurrents which work within those, because some of the planned savings have been in areas that, as an opposition councillor, I've disagreed with those savings being made, because they've been at the to the detriment of some of my constituents, I feel, in terms of what was actually being planned. Similarly, I think there's a lot of very interesting takes that we've had over the years about what the appropriate level of reserves should be for a medium-sized council of this nature. And I think it's very interesting. We have to have this discussion. I don't know if Councillor Wilson's still with us, but we did have this discussion last night in corporate performance and resources about the appropriate levels of resilience. My take, welcome back, Councillor Wilson. My take is that if a global pandemic which closes down your services for several months is not enough to knock you completely out of the ballpark, then actually you maybe you did still have too much there, because you should be considering that appropriate level. I have probably two questions. I don't know if Karis is still here. So I've got it minimized. So I don't know if Karis is still here, or she'd lost her connection. Yep. I just have a
He's
question
there.
just regarding the council tax take, which is regularly presented as a surplus of several £1 million, which doesn't quite go with the figures, the collection figures, which seem a lot closer to our balance of 97.5% collection rate. So I was wondering if there's a clarification there, maybe whether it's tonight or a different point, and what that phrased more carefully. The other is for Audit Wales in terms of presentation of the report. I've been, as a member of the committee, I've been sent a copy of this report in black and white, which isn't great for making distinctions between some things that have been there. But I've just looked at it online, and I similarly, on the basis of the size, I still can't distinguish. I'm particularly looking at the revenue sources page, which I think is 5 of 14, which I have in black and white, so I can't tell the difference particularly on my printed copy, but I also can't see very well online either. So just a plea for clarity in the design and layout. Thank you.
Shall I take that issue then in relation to the council tax collection figures? I can certainly send you some information of the history of that. And some of the issue is around, some of it includes old council tax that we've collected. So when we have the larger figure, that's because it's including some council tax from previous years. Our in-year collection was 97.7% against an assumed 97.5. The reason that doesn't equate strictly on our council tax base is because there will be previous year's collections included in that larger figure that we report to committee. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Karis. That does make sense. I'm also interested in a clarification regarding how it operates with the precepts that are levied by town community councils and South Wales Police, on the basis that they request a specific amount, but obviously any over collection from us presumably therefore comes entirely to us, and they don't get anything additional above and beyond. So if we if we have a higher collection rate than we anticipate, then we see the benefit of it. But if we had a lower rate than we set, then we take the hit. Just clarifying if that's how it operates, because it does feel like it's operated in our favour on a regular basis here.
Well, the town and community councils and the police, as you say, will set their precept for the year, and that's what they get paid during the year. So any ups or downs on the collection for the year rests with this council.
So in the case of this year, for example, not that I want to talk about this year, if our collection is below 97.5%, we take all of the hit, while TCCs and South Wales Police get the figure of which they budgeted. Is that correct?
That's what I believe, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Wilson.
Please. Yeah, there's a couple of points, not necessarily related to Councillor Johnson. I will take up his previous point about town and community councils. As you know, many of us are members of town and community councils here on this committee, and of course we don't get any grant funding. So we need that kind of assurance of that precept money coming in, because that's pretty important. If we start to be treated the same way as the Borough Council over this, then clearly, you know, we will need some more funding. So it is an issue, but you rightly raised it. Two other separate points though, the medium-term financial strategy. I take on the point that audit recommends some sort of scenario analysis of good, average and bad scenarios, and I understand that. But what was interesting, especially it comes from audit in particular, was about planning for the future in terms of future income based upon developments. Now, we can have developments that may or may not come on stream. And my only concern, my only slight criticism, I would say, in terms of report from audit here, is, you know, if we start building on these kind of scenario analysis and forecasts, then some councils may seize upon it and say, ha, we don't need to increase the council tax anymore because we're going to have this development next year, and the year after we're going to have that development, and the year after that we're going to have another development, and we're going to have all these incomes coming in. And nice. And admittedly, you do say about expenditures forecast, I understand that, but I do think we need to be a bit careful here about moving forward and thinking about the future. I mean, no one ever thought we'd have COVID and lockdown this year anyway, even 2 or 3 months beforehand. So trying to forecast what's going to happen in 22, 23, 24, 25, given this situation, the precarious nature of our economy at the moment, you know, I do think we need to tweak this a little bit with a little bit of pinch of salt at the moment.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, if we move to the recommendations then, first of all, that members note the report, and secondly, to endorse the proposed approach. Are we all agreed on that? Okay, if we move on to item 10 then, which is the corporate risk register.
Good evening, Chair. I'll take this one if that's okay. You've got with you the Q1 corporate risk register this evening. The updates to which have been drawn from the review of quarterly performance as they would be ordinarily. Clearly, as has been a refrain throughout your meeting this evening, coronavirus has had a significant impact throughout Q1 on the risk register, and for that reason, you'll note within the register that all of the corporate risks have been reviewed for the impact that the pandemic has had. We're also, as part of the report, recommending that your committee endorses the inclusion of a specific risk relating to coronavirus, and that means that it would bring the total number of risks on the corporate risk register to 16. So the report that has been taken, as I say, drawn from the quarterly performance reports, has had a reflection in terms of coronavirus on the mitigating actions. It hasn't had a huge impact in terms of the scoring on the risks within the register, but it does flag within that report that there's significant potential for that to happen as the results of the pandemic start to hit. As usual, the report gives you a summary of what's happened within the quarter. In terms of future forecast direction of travel, the risks associated with Brexit, environmental sustainability and welfare reform are forecast to increase over time, whilst the information security, waste and integrated health and social care risks are forecast to decrease over time. There are 142 actions that are being tracked as part of risk management plans currently, 87 of which are either completed or on track to be, with 13 reporting minor slippage. So that's the kind of summary of the report. In terms of coronavirus, just to say thank you to colleagues from Audit Wales who have taken a look at a draft of this risk and given us some critical friend feedback. That's been a really useful process as part of our ongoing conversations. I'm meeting with colleagues on a fortnightly basis now to talk about coronavirus and the impact on our assurance work, and that's been really, really useful as a process. So the coronavirus risk has got two aspects to it. One is in terms of the impact on the council in terms of our response initially to the coronavirus pandemic. The second then is starting to look at the risks associated with recovery, so starting to explore the themes around issues like economic downturn, potential poverty, impacts on the community impacts. And as I flagged at corporate performance last night, the recovery strategy is being reported to all committees next month. It was reported to Cabinet on Monday of this week, and you'll start to see some of those themes being taken forward. And the risk action plan associated with the coronavirus risk is very much in terms of establishing that strategic recovery priorities and then the directorate plans to deliver it. It's been a difficult one to score, if I'm honest. Trying to assess the risk associated with the pandemic while we're in the middle of it is no mean feat, and it's been useful, as I say, to have Audit Wales's input into that, and we've kicked that around at strategic leadership team quite a lot. It's scored currently medium high, which on balance feels probably about right in terms of where we are currently. But as I say, we've indicated that the future direction of travel against that risk is for it to increase as we start to see the effects kick in the coming months. So what we're recommending as part of this report is obviously we'll keep a very close eye on that one. The other risk that I just wanted to flag to committee in terms of a particular increased forecast direction of travel is around Brexit, with ongoing trade negotiations ahead of December 2020 and the potential uncertainty that has around things like the supply chain impacts on employment and specifically within social care and health settings, especially in light of the pandemic. That one feels that it was worthy to flag to yourselves. But as usual, the report itself has got a summary of the risks. You can see the heat maps which show the distribution of those risks in terms of their ratings, and then gives you by exception where those slippages actually are in terms of exception reporting. So that was just a very quick summary of the report for yourself, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for the report, Tom. Obviously, this is Q1. We are in the last week of Q2 now, so I'm probably looking for clarification on on directions of travel, since this is supposedly relevant, because similar to anything last year's accounts, what happened in April to June also feels quite historical at this point, and I refer to the staff surveys we carried out in June as being, well, how relevant is that? I appreciate that there are two quite cross-cutting and perhaps complementary issues within here regarding both Brexit and the pandemic. So how we I'm interested to hear how you really score those as complementary issues, and then there are, with regards to the more single issue problems, we've discussed in passing last night about issues regarding waste, both from a financial and a delivery perspective. So how that's moved over the summer. A little bit more maybe on the information security risk rating here, which seems high, and I think that needs a little bit of unpacking. And just as a sort of more of a side note, one of the risks identified here is regarding the 21st Century Schools, sort of program and school reorganisation investment. I'm aware of delays to the St Barrack waterfront site in Barry as a result of issues with the consortium and the signing of Section 106, etc. I think it's like clarification that those are not, we're not facing systemic issues, or not likely to face systemic issues with any delivery of that over the part of the next year. Thank you. So a few points in there, but I'll be able to pick them up. Thank you.
Okay, if I can respond to those, Chair. In terms of the difference between the time you're closing the quarter and then reporting it to you, it's a perennial issue for us. But what I can provide assurance for the committee is that in terms of the scoring and the direction of travel, we do undertake a sense check of those prior to the publication of the register. So we don't firmly stick to, if this was the status of the number of actions at the end of Q1, but something significant moves within that the coming months, that we don't reflect that. So in terms of the direction of travels, they're always reviewed quite late before producing the papers, to make sure that there's nothing that has happened since the end of the quarter that would materially affect the direction of travel. So there is that slight sense check. The actions and the RAG statuses are as at the end of the quarter, if that kind of makes sense. In terms of the information security risk, that one had escalated over the past few quarters, as you say, Councillor Johnson, and that one is forecast now to decrease, and to decrease relatively quickly. The IT team have procured some additional software over the summer, which is being rolled out currently. And with the completion of the Office 365 rollout now, as we get towards the end of October into the beginning rather of November, that's those two actions taken together are felt by that team to collectively have the impact of reducing that risk quite significantly. So that's the reason for seeing that one forecast in terms of a downward trajectory of its residual rating. In terms of the waste risk, that one is multifaceted in terms of the risks associated with rolling out the Welsh Government blueprint. Obviously, members will be aware that that's been delayed in Barry in the spring, but is now forecast to be taking place, I think, from the 19th of October. But it also has the aspect within that of commodity prices for recyclable goods once the waste is actually collected, and the inability, I guess, to control the market to understand the value of that recyclable material. So that's the reason for those. In terms of the 21st Century Schools programme, I'll certainly take away to undertake, if that's okay with you, to understand if there's anything else behind that risk. I know that having done the review of the summer with colleagues within 21st Century Schools, that whilst there is the delay that you allude to associated with the developer at St Barrack, the rest of the programme is forecast to be being deliverable and has had probably less impact than we perhaps could have anticipated as a result of the pandemic. But I can certainly take that one away to get a little bit more information, because I'm not as close to the detail on that one as I could be to give you the answer that you need.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just on a few points there. Some cost-cutting risk themes, I suppose. One of the issues that I'm very worried about is obviously if we have a hard Brexit, and obviously with a hard Brexit, we may have an impact upon supplies. I mean, and given the fact COVID is becoming a more serious issue at the moment, and if the projection of travel continues to go up, it's going to get more and more serious. Hence the demand for respiratory equipment, PPE equipment will go up through the roof, especially in medical areas or high risk areas. And I'm asking the question of the council really, and obviously with the resilience forum and everything, have we really got enough PPE to cover the fact of rapid COVID going up exponentially at the moment? Sorry, excuse me. And also a hard Brexit with possible supply issues there. And really, can the council cope with that, given the fact that we could be facing that situation? The other thing in relation to that, obviously, is COVID, is welfare reform as well. And obviously, as you know, we still haven't had the full impact of welfare reform yet on the Belgium organ. And clearly, to me, that's a major risk going forward, especially with COVID as well. And although we've got some reforms coming up for the Chancellor, we don't know if they're necessarily going to be strong enough or resilient enough to stop unemployment rising, stop more and more people on welfare. So I do think that is a very serious issue. And another issue, which is probably unrelated to that, but nevertheless, I have raised it before, is the additional learning needs bill as well, an act that's going to be implemented in 2021. We know it's been delayed already, but I just wondered, perhaps are we well placed to deal with any litigation or impact upon that, bearing in mind the LEA is responsible for learners or additional learners up to, I think it's up to 25 or even possibly 26 years of age. It is an issue because I know the local authority is responsible for this, not any FEIs or any other institutions. So perhaps, maybe we can have an update on the AON, maybe perhaps in the new year, because after all, it's in 2021, it's going to be introduced, and how we as a council are going to handle that risk. Thank you.
If I can perhaps respond to those in reverse order, Councillor Wilson. Certainly I can ask colleagues within education to join us for one of our meetings in early 2021 to provide you with an update in detail in terms of the implementation of the ALM Act. The point around cross-cutting themes and risks is a really good example, I think, of a couple of the risks that you can see within the register, and specifically around supply issues. That's one of the major areas of concern flagged within the Brexit risk. Certainly, I'll take back to understand the supply chain around PPE. Currently, the supply of and availability of PPE is very good in terms of stocks for the council that we're continuing to provide to our staff, but also that of our commission providers. But it is a good example of one of the questions around preparedness for Brexit. At our strategic leadership team this morning, we talked about the need to update the preparedness plans for Brexit ahead of the end of December. I was particularly pleased to be given that responsibility, so we'll be getting on to starting that work tomorrow morning. And what that will involve is looking at all our service areas again and asking questions exactly around that in terms of supplies of goods and materials, but also about labour as well. And just to flag, in terms of welfare reform, that is one of the reasons for forecasting the direction of travel to be upward in terms of the impact on coronavirus. It's worth, I suppose, flagging that we had 170 people more on universal credit in the Verity Morgan in August than we did in July. That follows a significant increase from March to July. And we've seen the proportion of people, or the percentage of people within the Vale who are unemployed, almost double in the period from March to August as well. So you can start to see how these kind of issues start to interrelate, absolutely. And I suppose the task for us is ensuring that when we're presenting the risk register, we're showing how those things are starting to link together and those themes start to emerge.
Okay, thank you for that. Tom, do we have any other questions or comments? I think that's Councillor Wilson trying to come in.
Sorry, can I just say, Tom, can I thank you very much for your report? It was excellent. Okay, and I'm always totally amazed how much hard work you do in that team. And I know you had an amazing team producing these very detailed and thorough reports. And, you know, and they are very interesting reading. You know, you do have lots of issues there that do need to be looked at. I mean, and there are things that we could discuss somewhere else, I know, like deprivation, liberty, safeguards. It's always going to be an important issue. And I do think, you know, you're commended, and I really think, you know, you do a really good job. But I do think, you know, you've highlighted the areas that we are all concerned about. And of course, our final issue, and of course, you know, we're talking about the three major challenges facing our world at the moment. And of course, the one we haven't mentioned tonight is climate change. Even if we get over coronavirus and Brexit, we won't necessarily get over climate change very easily. That, to Max, is the major challenge, you know, not just for us, but probably for the entire planet.
Thank you. I'll certainly pass on those comments to the team. I have the very easy job of just coming and presenting the report, not having to do the hard work. And we'll get on to climate change next week, Councillor.
Okay, I think we'd all echo Mark's comments regarding the work the team have been putting in. It's that if we could put the that on the record. With there being no further questions or comments, then if we move to the recommendations, then the first one to note the position and to refer the report to Cabinet. I'm assuming we're all in agreement on that. Okay, if we move on then to the Corporate Complaints Annual Report.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to pick pick that one up. So this is the 6th annual report based on our current 2-stage policy. And the report reviews the Council's complaint handling performance during 2019-20, and also the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales annual letter for the Council, which sets out the volume and performance of the complaints that have been referred to the Ombudsman during the year. So the annual complaints report provides a statistical analysis of the performance. It's not intended to be a detailed qualitative assessment of individual or groups of complaints. However, it can provide key indicators, I think, of performance areas where we're doing really well and those which maybe require a little bit more work. In terms of performance, I guess we're looking at how do we gain insight into the level of citizen satisfaction regarding services that are provided, and understanding how satisfied complainants are with how we handle complaints. We're able to monitor our responsiveness against statutory guidance in terms of how quickly we should be responding to complaints, and also identify potential for improving services through lessons learned from complaint handling and applying those to how we deliver services. And while the report focuses on corporate complaints, it does include a summary of adult services complaints, although they are subject to a separate complaints policy and process, so there's no direct comparison. The report, as you'll have seen, contains lots of statistics which are designed to give some idea of the types and volume of complaints, not just for 1920, but to look at trend information as well. I'm not going to go through all of them, you'll be glad to hear, but there are a few that I'd like to draw the committee's attention to. First of all, in terms of the overall number of complaints, on the face of it, we've seen an increase from 420 in 2018-19 up to 559. And although that on the face of it would indicate an increasing level of dissatisfaction with services, I think it's really important to note that 202 of the complaints for last year were specifically in relation to changes to waste collection routes and recycling arrangements in the rural Vale in kind of September, October, November. And if you look at the dashboard on the front of the report, you'll see that there's quite a spike of complaints during that period. If we set those complaints aside, the number of overall complaints would have totaled 357, probably a little bit higher because we would have received other complaints during that period as well. But it would have been a kind of a flat pattern of demand from that perspective. And that's broadly a longer term trend. In fact, the number of complaints we receive stay relatively constant. I think the other thing I'd like to draw the committee's attention to is a key indicator of complainant satisfaction, which is with regarding how the council investigates complaints, is the number that are escalated to stage 2 and then onto the ombudsman. As in previous years, we have a high percentage of complaints that get resolved and stopped at stage 1. So for this year, it was 94.1% of complainants accepted the outcome at stage 1 and didn't feel the need to escalate any further, which is a great indicator, I think, in terms of customer satisfaction about the complaint being investigated thoroughly and fairly, and the outcome being fair as well. Of the 37 stage 2 complaints that were investigated during the year, only 9 were escalated to the ombudsman. So again, a relatively small proportion and indicating a high level of customer satisfaction with the outcomes of the complaints. The council's performance against investigation deadlines improved during the year, standing at 68%, completed within target, which is an improvement on the 57% in the previous year. Our policy states that stage 1 should be completed within 10 working days and stage 2 within 20 working days. And although we've seen a significant improvement, I think that's still an area that we could improve on. However, I think it's important to recognise that there are a range of reasons why those targets might be missed. So it may be that we're waiting on information from the customer, for instance. But also we haven't received any complaints during the year regarding the speed of response. So that indicates that although we're missing the targets in some instances in the policy, actually we're meeting customer expectations, which is critical, obviously. But definitely an area that I think we can work on, and in fact our managers in the council have access to the corporate complaints data, real-time data for their area on the Oracle platform, which I think is part of the reason why we've seen an improvement this year. Overall, 59 complaints were upheld or in part during the year, upheld in whole or in part during the year, which is higher than the national average of 42%, which is quoted in the Ombudsman's annual letter. However, we do appear to be meeting the requirements of our statutory bodies with no reports taken into investigation during the year by either the Ombudsman or the Welsh Language Commissioner. So main opportunity for improvement lies with learning from complaints and being able to demonstrate how our services have been improved as a result of receiving complaints. So only 17% of complaints had a learning outcome recorded, and only 38.5% had a cause recorded. Of those that did have a cause recorded, service standards not met was the top item, with around 21% of the total. The two highest recorded learning outcomes were, unsurprisingly, review service standards and then staff training and development. So just in summary, overall, I think the council's performing, or the statistics indicate that the council's performing well. Complainants are satisfied with how the complaints are investigated. We're improving our responsiveness, although we still have to go a little bit further on that. We haven't really seen, when we exclude the kind of one-off events from last year, we haven't seen a significant increase in complaint numbers. And the fact that statutory bodies aren't taking complaints into investigation, I think is a really good indication that our complaint handling is working really well. The Appendix B is the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales annual letter, and it provides comparative and council-specific data relating to matters which have been referred to the Ombudsman from a customer complaints perspective, but also the code of conduct and town and county council complaints, community council complaints. So the Ombudsman has requested that the letter is referred to Cabinet and that feedback is provided. The data in the letter shows that the Ombudsman received 30 complaints in total, or 0.23 complaints per 1,000 residents from the Vale of Glamorgan, which is below the Welsh average of 0.28 and is in the bottom half overall for all Welsh councils. Of the complaints that were received, 7 were for housing, 6 for building control, and those were the two highest. Of the 30 complaints, 18 of those were deemed to be premature, so the customer hadn't been through our local complaints process, hadn't given us the opportunity to resolve the issues, or they were out of jurisdiction. So no complaints were taken into investigation during the period, although 4 were subject to early resolution or voluntary settlement. So we were able to resolve the matter quickly without the Ombudsman having to investigate the issues raised by the complainant. This represents 15% of all the closed cases for the Vale of Glamorgan during the year, which is around the Welsh average of 13%. There were 2 code of conduct complaints received by the Ombudsman during the year, both of which were closed after initial consideration. and there were 7 Town and Community Council complaints, of which 1 was referred to the Standards Committee. The Ombudsman letter requests that the Council engages with the Complaints Standards Authority to provide performance data and to participate in staff training, and we're actively doing that already as we're 6 months into the year. So happy to take any questions on any of that.
Okay, I think Councillor Johnson first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm very excited and want to ask lots of questions tonight. Thank you for the report, Tony. As you're aware, there's a lot of statistics within here. From a presentational perspective, I think that can actually make it quite difficult to assimilate all of the information and detail that's here. I'm just wondering, sort of going forward, whether there's opportunities, whether it's, I don't know whether it's layout issues or whether maybe some case studies of what sort of queries and complaints are coming forward and how the council resolved them might be helpful for consolidating our knowledge of this. Maybe it's worth looking at what the Ombudsman or the Welsh Language Commissioner do in presentation, so that we can get a better feel for what's happening in here, because it just feels like a barrage of stats and information, which I quite like. Personally, I like lots of stats, but I think it's quite difficult to really get a handle on something when you start getting into decimal points and you're going, okay, how many actual complaints was that? Then I don't think you're picking up the real vibe of what's going on. In saying that, I think there's lots of really interesting nuggets of information within here, which I'd like to just pick out trying to understand some of the learning. So for a start, there's we have a very low number of recorded learning outcomes, which have dropped again. So those weren't very good before, so I'm wondering why that's increased. Is that to do with the with the change in profile this year to the large number of complaints related to the waste, for example? What is the learning of that? It's a one-off in the sense that it happened once in the rural Vale, but it's now going to happen in Barry in October. Will we see a similar spike? Are those complaints justified? How have those issues that were present in the rural Vale been resolved? So that sort of thing I think would be quite interesting to know and understand. What can I expect in terms of complaints from my local residents when this is rolled out in my patch? That idea of there not being much learning outcomes recorded, what does that affect? If only 1 in 6 are actually being included, does that mean that we're missing out on a wide range of data that could be impacting upon our ability to change and improve, service regimes? So those are 2 points, and my third point is about well, 2 more points very quickly. One is that I do like the way that the Public Service Ombudsman has benchmarked us. I think that's helpful to know how many complaints other people are getting and what those are, because that provides us with an idea of whether it's high. It's not necessarily a high is bad or low is good, and I say that in the context of Welsh language complaints not coming through. Is that because we are performing phenomenally well in delivering Welsh language services? And as a Welsh speaker, I would suggest no is the answer, or people not having a great deal of faith in the Welsh Language Commissioner and the systems to deliver the change that they're looking for. Just as an example, yesterday our social media team linked to adult education courses, and when I clicked the link through, I found that the translation was all over the place, and we had things with the English language words with CY afterwards, where presumably someone was supposed to have overwritten the Welsh and hadn't, and that was live on our website, being tweeted out by our social media, presumably also on Facebook. So I had to send them a note to say, you might want to consider whether this has been translated correctly, got a message back from them. But obviously that's me using informal social media channels, which are now more normal and wouldn't come through a Welsh language commissioner standards application complaint, because that isn't an effective use of anyone's time to do that, when really it's an IT issue for us. So there's a couple of points there, Tony. I'd be grateful if you could just pick them up and talk through some of the learning that's available there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, certainly in terms of the key from our perspective is that the information is provided in a way that draws out the important kind of patterns of statistics in terms of being able to understand how things are changing, and so quite happy to relook at that. I mean, in this report we've tried to have a balance between the kind of dashboards. So there's the corporate dashboard at the beginning and the directorate dashboards at the back of the report. And you're right, I mean, you could go into a huge amount of detail, but happy to look at how we could maybe use case studies maybe more effectively to bring out some of the key learning to demonstrate what's actually happening on the ground. In terms of the waste management spike last year, are we likely to see it again this year? Well, I know that the project team have learned a lot of lessons from last year. Waste management, I think, account for something like 70% of the total complaints for the council. However, when you look at the number of individual transactions they undertake with customers, then the actual numbers compared to that are quite low. The other thing I would say is that roughly 58% of their complaints were upheld last year. So if that's a kind of an indication of overall kind of service performance, but I would say I would hope to see a reduction in complaints based on the kind of rollout in Barry for this October, albeit that it is a very complicated change in service to achieve. And we would hope that, although we'd hope that things would go smoothly, obviously things do happen. I think it's great in terms of the ombudsman in terms of the comparison, and maybe it's something that we can kind of take away and look at in terms of trying to kind of replicate that internally in a more easily understandable way. It's always a bit tricky with complaints because you only know what you know to some extent, and you don't know whether there are unsatisfied people out there, whether it's Welsh language or any other aspect of the service, who don't complain because they're apathetic or don't know how to complain. The other thing I would say is we do advertise the complaints process on our website. We have leaflets at reception points when they're open, and we try to make it as easy as possible for people to complain. Last year, you'll notice in the report that the equalities information is fairly sparse. So for quite a number of years, we were doing one-off collections of data for equalities information from complainants to make sure that we weren't missing out on particular sections of the community in terms of ability to complain. So last year we tried to look at collecting that information on an ongoing basis, so sending out equalities information with leaflets, with each individual complaint, and also having an online equalities form for people who made their complaint online. Unfortunately, there was very low take up of that, so I think this year we're going to revert back to a kind of marketing type data collection exercise, and hopefully that will give us much better information about who's complaining so that we can assess better who's taking advantage of the complaints process, and then if there are particular sections of the community due to age or whatever that we're missing out on, then we can do more targeted marketing and promotion of the complaints process in that way. And certainly in terms of the specific feedback you've given on the Welsh language with regard to adult education, we'll take that away and kind of highlight to the team to make sure that gets rectified.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah,
Councillor.
Yeah, just a couple of observations, really. I mean, given the situation that we are facing and we are at the moment, obviously COVID, and if we are doing this waste management changes in Barry, then obviously perhaps we need to think about the expectations upon the residents of Barry in particular about how they're going to get in contact with people, given the situation that, you know, not many people are going to meet people face to face so much now, given the situation. So we need to make sure those channels are open. And when I thought one idea, perhaps, I know that Councillor Cowell uses it, I use it, and I know other councillors do, and that's Nextdoor. And I know that, you know, Nextdoor is a very good source of local information. And it's what I like about Nextdoor is it groups in very small communities. And I think really perhaps the council should be a bit more proactive and talk about corporately perhaps on Nextdoor to remind people of waste collections, to remind people that there's this sort of local issue in this particular road, sort of thing in that sort of micro level perhaps, and perhaps give some, I don't know, empowerment to even the gangs that go around to collect the waste and say, actually, we've got a bit of an issue here, but don't worry, your collection will be coming the following day. So you don't need to complain. You know, in that sense, I think we can then nail it quicker than rather than perhaps using our big channels, which don't really kind of work for those sort of local situations.
Can I come back in there? So I think that customer communication is absolutely critical in terms of managing expectations and getting kind of contextual information out there, you know, at the right time. We've got something like 62,000 people signed up to our email contact lists, and I think we could probably exploit that a bit more. But also, you know, we are currently reviewing our CRM technology, and I think one of and we've been discussing with various services about what outcomes they would like to get from that process, I guess. And one of the key things has been a kind of better use of data. So how can we use real-time data so that we can let our customers know exactly what's happening, either as individuals or communities, so that they don't have to contact us or don't have to complain because we've already explained what's happening, as a for instance. But also just in terms of the customer experience, in terms of making sure that we proactively communicate with customers. You know, if they've requested a service, we tell them what stage the service is at. We tell them when we're coming to do the thing, and that's something which we're proactively looking at. And with a fair wind, we're hoping to have kind of some game-changing technology in place by, hope Tom doesn't mind me saying that, game-changing technology in place by this time next year, which will give us the functionality that we need to really deliver that type of customer experience.
I'd say thank you very much for that, Tony.
No problem.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, if we move on to the recommendations, then first of all, to note the contents of the report, continue to receive an annual update, and refer the report and committee's comments to Cabinet. I think we can all agree on that one. If we move on then to item 12, the annual internal audit plan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to say a couple of words really before handing over to Joan to take us through some of the detail in the report. Basically, I'd just like to make some similar comments to those made by Steve from Audit Wales really in relation to their audit plan. We're 6 months later in presenting this plan to you than is normally the case for obviously self-evident reasons. We had to reevaluate our original draft plan due to the implications of COVID, new ways of working, remote working, changing circumstances, potential second wave and so on at the time of writing this, and this is what seems to be happening, outbreaks and so on. Ability to access staff and records, and obviously take account of the views of SLT in terms of the new risks facing the organisation. So that's the context really that we're working in, and some of the issues that we've had to deal with and are dealing with. So at that point, perhaps I can just hand over to Joan to go through some of the detail in the report.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. As Mark has said, the purpose of this report is to provide members of the Audit Committee with the annual internal plan for 2021. It's in line with the public sector internal audit standards. As Mark has already said, as a result of significant changes to the way the Council was and is operating due to the outbreak of the pandemic in March 2020, it was necessary to re-evaluate the original draft plan that had been prepared prior to the outbreak. And the revised plan, as Mark has already said, takes account of an updated assessment of risk as a result of COVID-19. Also, it's recognised that there have been changes in the way audits will have to be undertaken, as no visits can be undertaken now to establishments or to visit clients. Therefore, both the auditors and auditees will have to get used to remote working and new ways that the audits will be undertaken. The revised plan, therefore, is more flexible than usual to enable it to respond to changing circumstances and events such as a second wave. However, it is considered that the proposed plan at Appendix A will offer sufficient coverage to be able to provide an opinion at the end of 2021. If you look at Appendix A, there I've listed the area that's proposed and the very brief audit scope and risk. This identifies all the high risk work to be undertaken in 2021. Please note there are 2 areas that were deferred from the 2019-20 plan, which was homelessness and performance management, and they don't appear at the moment on this plan. However, if resources allow as the year goes on, they will be picked up. So they're sort of, if you like, next on the list to be picked up as soon as possible. As I said, the plan is very flexible, so it is able to react to things as things change during the year. I'd just like to tell members that work has already started on some of these areas in the plan anyway, and progress against them will be reported next time to committee. But to date, there have been no areas of concern that have been identified. And I'm happy to take any questions on that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to hear your addition of homelessness and performance management there, because I was going to, I remember saying it was a good thing to see us having it on our list back in the summer, and I was a bit concerned that it's not on here. In fact, I mean, I don't know if there's provision here for reconsideration, but given the importance of the issue of homelessness within a Welsh Government perspective, given the challenges that have been outlined to councillors in the context of being able to find appropriate accommodation and ensure that within a second wave, I would sort of actually expect to see that included within here as one of the high risk areas. We've seen reports to councillors about the problems of finding accommodation for people in need as a result of COVID. It's clearly a Welsh Government priority, so I would like to see that within here. I appreciate that all of this has a level of flexibility, and that it's difficult to to be able to allocate time, etc., in the normal way of working. But we are obviously halfway, as I've said earlier tonight, we are a week away from the end of Q2. So an understanding of where we are, by next time, and what we haven't been able to do, or what's been slowed down, or where there isn't enough resource. How much resource do we have internally to allocate to this? How much are we still giving things to swap, etc.? I think that would be helpful to have a little bit more detail when we next come back. But I would specifically draw attention to homelessness as a challenge that I'm aware is facing the council. There were multiple questions to council on Monday about it from myself and Councillor Charles, and maybe others as well. So I think that it just struck me that it wasn't on there.
If I can respond there, Chair. Thank you for that. Yes, I appreciate what you've said about homelessness. There is flexibility in the plan. I think when we were trying to finalise this, we were aware that homelessness was under intense pressure on the service themselves. So it was something we were aware of, and as you said, we have flexibility. So as things progress, I'm hopeful that we will be able to build it in as soon as we can. But obviously, when we come back next time, we'll be in a much clearer position to let you know when that will be planned.
Okay, any other members? Okay, if we move on to the recommendation then to consider and approve. Are we all in favour? Okay, if we move on then to the Regional Internal Audit Service Charter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll take this report. The purpose of the report is to present to members the Regional Internal Audit Service Charter for 2021. The Regional Internal Audit Service Charter defines the purpose, authority and responsibilities of the Regional Internal Audit Service across Bridgend, Merthyr Tydfil, Rhondda and Taff and the Vale of Glamorgan councils. This is the first time a consistent charter for the 4 councils has been proposed, and is consistent with the objectives of the Regional Shared Service, that is to eliminate duplication and apply best practice. The Head of Internal Audit is responsible for reviewing the charter and presenting it to each Council's Audit Committee annually for review and approval in line with the public sector internal audit standards. And one of the key roles, this is one of the key roles to demonstrate the Audit Committee's oversight, is the approval of the Internal Audit Charter. So that's really the background and some of the key messages. But basically, every internal audit service needs to have a charter approved by the relevant body, which is obviously what we do in this evening. The charter is split into the following sections, as referenced in paragraph 1.7: purpose, authority and responsibility, independence and objectivity, proficiency and do professional care, quality assurance and improvement programme. And the charter also has 2 annexes containing a glossary of terms and the code of ethics for internal auditors. As I said earlier, this is the first time that we've had a consistent charter across 4 authorities. It's already been to 2 of the 2 authority audit committees, 3rd one tonight, and the 4th one is coming at the Rhondda and Taff Audit Committee the week after next for their consideration as well. So as part of pulling this together, reviewed all the existing charters, both for the 4 authorities as existed previously and some examples of good practice elsewhere. And this is a comprehensive document which covers all the areas that we need to cover and is there for members' consideration. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from members? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mark, for the report. It appears on the surface to me to be a very comprehensive document, as you said, drawn from previous pieces of work. And there's 2 just clarifications from me on what's page 8 of the document, which includes figure 1, the internal audit reporting arrangements. And I'm just clarifying so that head of internal audit is yourself, Mark,
That's right.
151 officer is Caris in this organisation.
That's right, yes.
Who's the audit committee members is obviously ourselves.
Yes.
Who is head of paid service in this context?
So that would be Rob Thomas as the managing director, or the chief executive as they're termed in the other three authorities.
Okay, that's great. And I'm just wondering if that's worth setting out in a bit more, in a footnote, just to explain who that is. I was also intrigued by the paragraph 2.6. The head of internal audit has unrestricted access to the chair of audit committee. I'm wondering what that means in practice. What I also I can read this as a as a layperson. We come back to the points I was making earlier. Our role as councillors, as opposed to to technical experts. So I was wondering whether Audit Wales had read this document and had an opinion. That's not an opinion, or just anything that they can see that that could improve this before we sign it off ourselves tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps if I can just respond to a couple of the points. So I think I covered in terms of clarifying the different roles. Yeah, one of the challenges of having a consistent document across 4 authorities when slightly different terminology and titles are used in different places for the similar roles. So that's why it's got head of paid service, which is a recognised legal term, but they can be called chief executives, managing directors, and so on in different places. Section 151 officer can be called director of finance, chief finance officer, those sorts of things. But again, section 151 officer is the legal term, and obviously audit committee members speaks for itself. But certainly, perhaps for next year, I can certainly add a footnote to clarify that, to make it clearer to the layperson. Yes, the term unrestricted access, I think it comes from the actual standard. So obviously, you've got to read that in the right way, but it's just making sure that the head of internal audit has got access to the chair of audit committee, because in some places, depending on the circumstances, that organisations don't necessarily want the head of internal audit to have access to the chair of audit committee. So it's something that needs to be there down in black and white, as it were. So perhaps I should say within a reasonable time frames and so on, and not at reasonable times of the day and night. So okay.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to raise on that?
Quickly, I just think what would be helpful to the head of audit here, and also to Councillor Johnson and everyone else, is perhaps we could put that in the glossary about head of paid service or head of service as to who it refers to. I think that may be helpful going forward.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, there being no Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, I was just wondering whether it was possible to. I don't know whether Anthony, Steve, Rachel, anybody has read this document as part of tonight, or in the context of other councils having their audit committee meetings and passing this. But it'd just be a nice assurance for us that somebody at Audit Wales has taken a look at this document and is content that they can't improve it any further.
I'll pick that up. I certainly read the paper as part of us reading the papers. I wasn't technically reviewing it, Councillor, for completeness, or certainly any comparatives against any other authorities. But what I would say, it did look like a charter we see presented elsewhere within local government, and indeed the NHS. So it seemed that it seemed largely complete and very typical of what we would expect to see as a good practice charter.
Perhaps if I could add to that, that comment, yeah, in the process of actually updating and producing the charter, I obviously looked at the 4 previous ones that existed for the 4 authorities, and a number of examples from elsewhere, and I think it's fair to say that it's probably more comprehensive than those that we had previously. But yes, certainly useful to have a second opinion or a third opinion in terms of the content and so on, and happy to take any suggestions for the future.
Any further questions or comments?
Just one point from me,
Okay.
Chair, if I may. It's very quick. It's just the Charter makes explicit reference, doesn't it, to the relationship of external audit. And I'd just like to reassure, I guess, members that of the committee that that does in fact occur. We do have regular meetings with Joan and Mark, and you know, these are diarised at certain times of the year, and also we, if need be, we have had ad hoc conversations as well. So I just, you know, these aren't just words, they are things, as you would expect, which are actually put into practice. So just to add a bit more colour, I guess, in terms of the query earlier about a view from external audit, but that's like it working in practice, I guess, in terms of this particular charter.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. If we move on to the recommendation then to consider and approve the charter, are we all in favour? Okay, nothing under part 1. Despite discussions earlier, I'm not going to raise anything under part 2. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and I'll see you all at the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Good evening.